Chapter 2, Miniminuteman is a pseudo-archaeologist. Now, that's a hell of a statement, right? And that's coming from Graham Hancock's own website. Holly Lasko-Skinner, one of his authors, wrote this paper, and I'm wondering how she got to where she got, and if it's a fair piece, and if all the accusations here are correct. I mean, again, that's a hell of a statement, right? Now, I'm friends with both Graham and Milo. I talk to both of them fairly regularly, and I like them both. So this puts me in a weird spot, but also in a unique spot. I guess I'm probably best suited to evaluate this. I don't fucking know. Anyway, hi, my name's Dan, and welcome to Debunking. Now, this article is long. It's at least 10 minutes if you read it fast, and it's very thorough. She went through a lot of different papers, a lot of different articles, websites, and a lot of different videos in order to put her case together. And when she quotes a video and I'm showing that video, I'm just going to show the video. I'm not going to quote it. There's no reason, right? This is a video. This isn't a paper like what she wrote. And I'm going to save my personal opinion on this till the end. So if you're already familiar with this article, I'm going to put a timestamp down below, like a chapter thingy that you can click on and just go to the end and listen to me babble about it. Or if you've watched like half of the article, me going through the article, and you're like, okay, fine, I get the gist, which some people apparently do halfway through videos nowadays. So just click that there and you can go to the end and you can see me babble about my own personal opinions instead of just seeing me rehashing what Holly put into the paper. But first, we are going to lay out her case well, because she did lay out quite the case, and I can't really discuss it without showing the context, so here we go. On March 7th, 2023, archaeologist Dr. John Hoops from the University of Kansas wrote a tweet in support of Milo Rossi, aka Miniminuteman, noting that episode 1 of his YouTube series, I Watched Ancient Apocalypse So You Don't Have To, had received over 1 million views in less than a week. That's a great sign for popular interest in critical thinking and the debunking of pseudo-archaeology. Bravo, Miniminuteman! The archaeological community has upheld Rossi as a bastion of archaeological integrity in their perceived fight against pseudo-archaeology. This article investigates who Miniminuteman is and whether he is who he claims to be. Holly makes it clear that Milo is somebody that the older, more established archaeologists have propped up and said, yeah, good job, man, because of not his archaeological work per se, but for dragging Ancient Apocalypse. And Holly continues the evaluation here. Chapter 1, investigating the claim Miniminuteman is an archaeologist. Here she goes through Milo's social media about pages and the foreword to his book, highlighting the places Milo has branded himself an archaeologist. Then Holly shows us Dr. Miano's video on pseudo-archaeology, highlighting this clip.
Archaeology is partly the discovery of material remains, partly the meticulous work of the scientific analyst, and partly the exercise of creative imagination. It is not merely a set of beliefs. It is a practice. It is something that you do. If a person engages in the creative part of archaeology, but does not conduct the meticulous work, that person is not doing archaeology. Yes, archaeology can be considered a humanistic discipline, because its aim is to assist us in understanding humans. But it is also a scientific enterprise. The material record doesn't just tell us directly what to think. It needs to be interpreted. Archaeologists need to make sense of what is found, and they can do this only by engaging in scientific analysis. Just as a scientist collects data, evidence, conducts experiments, formulates a hypothesis, which is a proposition to account for the data, tests the hypothesis against more data, and then devises a model, which is a description that seems best to summarize the pattern observed in the data, so does an archaeologist.
Then we get the following quote from Society of American Archaeologists. While historians and archaeologists both use written documents to learn about the past, only archaeologists interpret archaeological sites. That involves unique field work. Next, Holly highlights several clips that a YouTuber named Daskalos, well, he's an archaeologist first and a YouTuber second, he's very clear about that, but he made a response to Milo's video about the Guadalupe ruins. And Holly shows us this quote first.
So the need for this video came about from my Discord and a couple of friends of mine. They asked me my opinion on this Milo Rossi guy and his exploration of the Guadalupe ruins. Now, full transparency, I've watched a little bit of this video already, and I was a little disappointed. For somebody who does stuff in archaeology and does education in archaeology, he does sort of tend to say things off the cuff and give you some bad information. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to watch the video here, and I'm going to stop it from time to time and make my comments as an actual archaeologist, a professional archaeologist who currently works in the field. So let's go ahead and dive right into it.
Now, Dascalos' video is pretty scathing, linked below, and Holly does quote it a few more times, but first she gives us a definition of archaeology from the Archaeological Institute of America. Archaeology is, first and basically, manual labor. The idea is to remove dirt carefully enough that we can tell exactly how things came to be situated as they were, and to record it carefully enough that we can reconstruct what happened in the past. We dig carefully because we want to know the context of every find. That's actually the single most important piece of information we are after. Knowing the context of something can make all the difference in how we understand it. For example, how differently would you interpret the meaning and use of an ancient oil lamp if you found it in a temple versus in a grave? As you can see, the quote Holly brought up highlights hands-on archaeology and preservation of context first and foremost, which gives us a little bit of a foreshadowing of the next few quotes that we're going to get from the video that Dascalos made.
Pottery, the first thing I'd recommend you to do is obviously take a ton of pictures, and then if you are not inclined to just leave it in the dirt where you found it, a lot of times other visitors to sites like this will put the little piece of pottery they have found on a stone or around a sign or something like that so that other visitors can enjoy it as well. So if you do find a piece like this, don't be afraid to add this to the growing collection for other visitors to enjoy.
No, don't do that. Okay, look, I don't know any single archaeologist that would tell you to pick up a piece of pottery and put it on a rock with other ones. First off, putting them on rocks drives us insane when we find them. Secondly, all you're doing when you're putting a piece of pottery up on a rock with the rest of the pieces of pottery that are in the area is you're just basically forming a display case for those who want to go shopping for artifacts. Milo, again, you have 1.5 million subscribers at the time of this recording. Do better, man. Don't tell your subscribers to pick up artifacts, okay? And here's the thing. If you don't understand why that's a bad thing, imagine artifacts. Each individual artifact is like a puzzle piece, right? You don't know what the picture is, what the total picture is. You just have just that piece. Well, the more pieces you have, the more of the picture you can construct, right? But you don't know where that piece comes from until you find something else that sort of tells you where it comes from, another piece that connects with it. Context, basically. So when you pick up artifacts and put them somewhere, like on a rock, like what he's suggesting, you are removing the artifacts from their context. And that is a bad thing. That is not a good thing. Don't do that. Please don't do that. Don't just leave them where they're at. Okay. Just don't even mess with them. Back to it.
This is a point revisited by both Dascalos and Holly.
A structure that bears a special spiritual significance, not only
be better, my friend, because that is very bad. And again, I've mentioned it before, with your subscriber count, you really should be showing people better practices than that. So please, if you're ever out at the ruins, don't touch them, don't sit on them, lean on them, climb on them. Oh God, I hope he doesn't climb these. And
revisited again, so I revisited.
It's kind of amazing to touch these stones and think that they were laid by someone who...
It is not amazing to touch the stones. You should not be touching the stones. So please don't touch the ruins. I've said it before, but he really shouldn't be saying stuff like that, because then 1.5 million subscribers might go out and actually start touching stuff, and then, you know, things start falling apart a lot faster. Please don't touch the ruins. Don't. He probably didn't know any better, but I'm telling you, with my 19,000 subscribers to his 1.5, please don't touch the ruins. That is bad practice.
Revisited to the point that it gets hammered home at the end of Dascalos' video.
But yeah, generally speaking, I really like what he's doing here. However, and Milo, if you're watching this, awesome, welcome. I got 19,000 subscribers. Why are you watching me? I'm kind of a small fry. My opinion, as an archaeologist, not a YouTuber, as an archaeologist, the bad advice and the bad behavior that you are showing on this video to your subscribers is just perpetuating that bad behavior to them. So the picking up of the shirts and telling them it's okay to relocate them is not okay. Don't, you know, touching ruins, touching artifacts, all that stuff is not okay. So I challenge you to be better, okay, with this, because you got the platform, man. You got the viewership. You can do so much better. If you just didn't tell people to do the wrong thing. Now, again, I haven't seen the rest of the videos, so I don't know if it's that way with all of them, but those are my big nitpicks with the whole thing. And some of them aren't even nitpicks. Some of them are pretty hardline stuff.
Now, to give Daskalos a little extra credit here, he really put himself out. I mean, he didn't have to make this video. He gave people like Holly and myself some ammunition, right? I mean, he did say that he hasn't watched any other of Milo's videos, so maybe he's unaware that Milo is so heavily involved in battling pseudo-archaeology or whatever. But the thing is that Daskalos basically did put his neck out there and gave ammunition to people like Holly and myself. And so if I was you, I would go give the guy a sub. He seems to be pretty impartial, which for an archaeologist on the social media era seems to be a little bit of a hard thing to find. But he's not the only one. I mean, Milo actually owned this when it was called out and pointed to his attention. He owned it, as Holly points out.
Interacting with a site, pretty much period, is a big no-no in archaeology. And so what I wanted to do, to use this as a teaching and a learning experience for all of us, is go over probably the first thing that they teach you in your Fundamentals of Archaeology class, which is the Archaeological Code of Ethics. For those of you that don't know, there is a Archaeological Code of Ethics outlined by the Society of American Archaeology that talks about sort of the guidelines that every archaeologist should have when working in the field. So I wanted to go over them to sort of address where I misstepped, be able to sort of rectify it, and then also give you guys the tools that you need in order to identify archaeological malpractice in the future. So to make very clear the sort of things that you're not supposed to do. Moving potsherds. Do not move the potsherds. In that video, I said that, you know, you can kind of put them near signs or people will make piles of them. Don't do that. Now, this one is one that it was a little bit embarrassing to be called out on, I have to admit, because that's something that I really should know better of. I will be the first to admit that. But I think my enthusiasm kind of overtook me there. I'm also not one who has done extensive work in the American Southwest. It's only been like tangential and reading about it. I've never done field work there. And so I am sort of unfamiliar with that environment. A lot of my sort of archaeological studies in college were on the shell middens in Maine. And a lot of what we were talking about there was, you know, your layers of stratigraphy, where obviously you don't want to disturb the context. You don't want to dig into it and rip things out, because the moment you move it from where it was, you have destroyed the most important piece of information you can get from it, which is where it sits in the strata. But when I would go out west and, you know, it's a riverbed full of these potsherds, you're like, man, it's a riverbed. Like, this shit's all been washed around, you know, what's the, like, how can moving it be that much damage? But it does, because archaeologists can look at the, you know, flow of a river. They can identify where these sherds have come from. And more importantly, if you end up putting all the sherds in one place, that may be great for people like you and I who want to go there and just look at them, but people will steal them. People suck.
Now, this is the first principle of the Archaeological Code of Ethics, something that both Holly and Milo agree that Milo should have known already.
Okay, let's go over the Archaeological Code of Ethics. Principle number 1, stewardship. The archaeological record that is in situ archaeological material and sites, archaeological collections, records, and reports are irreplaceable. It is the responsibility of all archaeologists to work for the long-term conservation and protection of the archaeological record by practicing and promoting stewardship of the archaeological record. So this one really is kind of the fundamental big boy number 1, which is don't disturb the context.
Holly highlights one more clip from the video.
That's our job. Yeah, I'm an archaeologist, I'm an environmental scientist, I'm an author, but my big thing is I'm a science communicator. This is my job. It's talking to you. You know, do you see, I don't have a shovel in my hand right now. And outreach is the most important thing that we have, because the moment that the academic world stops engaging with the public, it drives people towards fucking pseudoscience.
And then to finish the foundation of her case, she takes us to a hangout with Dr. Miano and Miniminuteman, where we hear this.
I find it really funny when someone who clearly does not have a very good grasp on the reality of a topic is labeled as just an author, because they don't have the credentials to be anything else. Like, they have no formal archaeology training.
Yeah, and if you don't believe that you need credentials, then you don't have to make up a credential, right? You don't have to say, I'm a special researcher or whatever. You could just say, I'm just me. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But the fact that they want to put something there to kind of make it sound as if they have credentials, that's kind of the interesting thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that I've definitely kind of noticed a lot in my time doing this, is because archaeology is such a field that is, you know, like stereotyped as being this very like highly academic, you know, field, which it is by and large. You know, many of the people I met in college are like lifetime career archaeologists. But that's something that I've noticed a lot when doing my videos, is I'm like, I don't know what to label myself as, because it'd make me feel like a fraud to say that I am an archaeologist when I have like a training in it. I haven't been out on a dig, you know, so it's like, I don't want to like claim that, when in reality, that title requires a lot of, you know, research and a lot of time and investment in order to say that. So I'm just like, I'm Milo. I talk about this stuff. You guys know I've been researching it, you know, my whole life. I'm a researcher. But like, you know, I don't feel the need to like make up some title to try and make myself sound like I'm, you know, I don't know, better than I am.
Yeah.
Now, that last part's pretty brutal, let's be honest. I mean, when you got a quote with Milo saying, if I called myself an archaeologist, I feel like a fraud, and then he calls himself an archaeologist quite frequently, does seem pretty hypocritical. Now, keep in mind, I am going to be commenting on my personal opinion at the end of the video. I just was saying right here that this is where this article is getting its bite from. This is the, like, moment in this paper here. And it forms the foundation for the rest of Holly's case, which she takes off with into Chapter 2. Miniminuteman is a pseudo-archaeologist, which she opens with investigating the claim that Milo Rossi, a.k.a. Miniminuteman, is a pseudo-archaeologist. As evidenced in Chapter 1, Milo Rossi, a.k.a. Miniminuteman, is on record stating that he is an archaeologist. He is not an archaeologist because he hasn't been adequately trained. If he were to call himself an archaeologist, he'd feel like a fraud. We're then presented with the definitions of archaeology from both the Archaeological Institute of America and the Society for American Archaeology. From the AIA, archaeology is defined as the scientific excavation and study of ancient human material remains. And the SAA quote we've already seen. While historians and archaeologists both use written documents to learn about the past, only archaeologists interpret archaeological sites. That involves unique fieldwork. Amazing an SAA quote didn't involve racism, huh? The difference between archaeologists and historians is expounded on, with Holly saying history is an art or a social science, and archaeology is both a social and physical science, with the difference being the acquisition and evaluation of empirical data. In other words, while historians just read about the stuff and ponder, archaeologists read, ponder, dig up evidence, and evaluate the things they dig up. Of course, the definition of pseudo is to follow with the Oxford definition used. Not genuine, spurious, or sham. A pretentious or insincere person. Supposed or purporting to be, but not really so. False, not genuine. Resembling or imitating. And Holly glues the two together to give us this statement. By logical deduction, a preliminary definition of pseudo-archaeologist is therefore an inauthentic, not genuine, fake archaeologist. Someone who calls himself an archaeologist when they lack adequate qualifications or training. A sham. Someone who calls himself an archaeologist to make it seem like they're an authority on archaeology when they're not. Pretentious. The opposite of a real archaeologist, who possesses the title archaeologist, because they not only possess adequate qualifications or training, but also follow the scientific method the discipline prescribes. Someone who imitates or resembles an archaeologist by applying methods to human material remains that are unique to archaeology practice, rather than another practice like history or environmental science. But Holly's not going to make us rely on her own definitions. She brings out some more quotes from Dr. Miano.
What exactly is pseudo-archaeology? Well, the literal meaning is fake archaeology. That is something that is not archaeology, which is masquerading as archaeology. Now, what if a person formulates a hypothesis and devises a model, but fails to collect all the necessary data, neglects to conduct experiments, and doesn't test the hypothesis against more data? Is that person practicing archaeology? If they fail to perform all the steps, no. They can be great at the speculative phase of archaeology, the creative part of it. They can dabble a bit in the data, even doing a small measure of analysis on a small number of artifacts. But if their data falls far short of what is needed for the subject, or if their experimentation is sorely lacking, in other words, they don't even come close to performing the necessary work, they're not practicing archaeology. They are, in fact, doing pseudo-archaeology.
As she points out, that statement is a little bit at odds with this other statement here.
Someone might say, well, It can only be called pseudo-archaeology if the person is claiming to be doing archaeology. What about cases when a person is drawing conclusions without ever calling themselves an archaeologist? If the person is making claims about the past, using material remains as evidence, they are performing the same function as an archaeologist. Just as a person who offers medical advice is performing the same function as a physician.
And Holly takes Dr. Miano's position to task. First, she points out that there is the massive distinction between someone saying, this is what you need to do to get better, and someone saying, I had a similar problem that you did medically, and this is what I took and I got better. One is a pseudo-physician, and the other one is just friendly advice. And then she drives this home by pointing out that historians like Dr. Miano actually do interpret the past, using material remains as evidence, and therefore, by his own definition, they are performing pseudo-archaeology. She summarizes by pointing out there's a distinction between using material remains to obtain results, which is the job of archaeologists, and using the results archaeologists attained to make their own interpretations. But if someone claims to be an archaeologist, Holly says we should check their methodology and motivations to determine if that's true or not. She then gives us another quote from Dr. Miano.
If a person reaches a conclusion that is in harmony with the mainstream consensus of history, but doesn't engage in the process scientifically, that person is doing pseudo-archaeology. The word pseudo-archaeology has nothing to do with whether a theory is correct. It's not the what that matters, it's the how. And so, measuring an object poorly or incompletely, failing to take into account all the evidence on the subject, and drawing far-reaching conclusions from it, is pseudo-archaeology.
And of course she gives us an example. Artifactually speaking, an archaeologist and YouTuber, much like Daskalos, did a response video to Miniminuteman's video on the Baghdad battery. She gives us this quote first.
Now Milo does a great job of debunking conspiracy theories that have to do with ancient artifacts and archaeological sites. Most archaeologists don't spend a lot of time trying to do that because, well, the leaps of logic that are involved with the people that want to believe the conspiracy theories are pretty convoluted, and it's difficult to convince them otherwise they really want to believe in this. So you can show them all of the evidence, and then they will claim that you are just ignoring their evidence and trying to maintain the status quo or something like this. Well, it means that you could spend your time in a much more valuable way by doing your own research and kind of forgetting about the conspiracy theories. I'm glad that Milo takes it on. He's got a lot of personality, a lot of bravado. It's a really interesting series of videos that he does, and I hope that he continues. Now, this particular object is related to some conspiracies, but it actually could be what people claim that it is, and that is an ancient battery. And it's closer to my field of expertise. I'm a Near Eastern archaeologist. I work primarily in Iraq now.
And then she shows that Milo was way off in his debunking, at least by the opinion of Artifactually Speaking, the archaeologist that works in that part of the world in the field.
I covered it in a podcast, Don't Wreck Yourself. It's a lot of fun. It's done by Ryan Placetti and Matt St. Singh. We went over a lot of different things, and the Baghdad battery came up, and I'd done very basic research on it and said, well, you know, maybe it could be a battery. We don't really know. It certainly didn't power ancient lights. Well, this is the kind of research most people do. If you search for the Baghdad battery, you're going to find some basic things, but you're not going to find the original data. You've got to dig for that. And so I became more and more interested in it after I did the podcast and after I'd heard that Milo was going to be covering it. So I'm going to watch Milo, see what he has to say, interrupt sometimes and say what I have found and talk about how that compares with what he's saying.
We're then shown a couple places that Milo got data wrong.
When Milo says we don't know anything about them in situ, about the ones at Seleucia, we absolutely do know, and it is very interesting. We'll analyze it in a minute. Okay, not all of this is true. He's talking about the Seleucia ones now, and none of those had an iron rod inside. Only the one at Kuyurabuwa had that. 3 of them had copper cylinders, and all 3 of those had papyrus, so he's wrong when he says one had papyrus. The one that didn't have a copper cylinder had the remains of a glass flask in it, and it was standing upright. The others were all laying down. So it's a confusion of information here, and we're not hearing the full story.
Holly then makes the case that Milo gave us inaccurate information because he failed to evaluate the artifact properly and take all the necessary information into account, something that both Daskalos and Dr. Miano made statements on.
If a person reaches a conclusion that is in harmony with the mainstream consensus of history, but doesn't engage in the process scientifically, that person is doing pseudo-archaeology. The word pseudo-archaeology has nothing to do with whether a theory is correct. It's not the what that matters, it's the how. And so, measuring an object poorly or incompletely, failing to take into account all the evidence on the subject, and drawing far-reaching conclusions from it, is pseudo-archaeology.
The bad advice and the bad behavior that you are showing on this video to your subscribers is just perpetuating that bad behavior to them. So the picking up of the shirts and telling them it's okay to relocate them is not okay. Don't, touching touching ruins, touching artifacts, all that stuff is not okay. So I challenge you to be better.
She highlights Milo's overconfidence in the interpretation in comparison to the other archaeologist, the guy who works in the region.
Now again, I want to make really, really clear while we have all four of these drawn that only one of them has the asphalt plug and the iron rod in it. The other three are functionally completely different from one another.
And I want to make really clear that this is not the full story and we're looking at conflated information here. We do have only the one with an iron rod, so he is right in many cases. I'm not trying to make fun of him. I'm just saying that, as so many people have done, it's really hard to get the real information, so they've made mistakes. And even with all of the information, I'm not necessarily right. I don't know what these really are. But when he says that the others are functionally different, I think he's wrong. I think these are functionally the same. They just have some variations. And remember that, his drawing shows 4 identical jars. They're not identical. Even at the Seleucia ones, 2 of them were missing that neck. Basically, this is a fairly common jar type in the Sasanian period. It's piriform. It comes up like a pear and comes over to a shoulder, and then up to a very narrow neck. And that neck has a handle on it. Well, if you break that neck off, you get what looks like what we're showing here is a Baghdad jar, or Baghdad battery. And we've got the copper in them, we've got the bitumen in them, and the papyrus in them. So I think it's not right to say that they are functionally different.
Now, the difference between knowing for a fact and not knowing is something regular viewers have seen me complain about a lot, so I can't really hide my feelings here, can I? Now, Holly, obviously, is making a strong case against Milo here for calling him a pseudo-archaeologist. It's starting to be fairly robust, and she's nowhere near done. She gives us some more talk from Dr. Miano about the evidence and all that stuff, and then we get into...
There was some theorization that these ones did also contain an iron rod at some point because there was other iron rods found at the gravesite, supposedly. But again, we have no records of the gravesite, and we have no evidence that these were ever implemented as part of this apparatus. So every single thing that we have to support this conspiracy going forward is based off of just this. A single jar. So here is my wonderful rendition of the Baghdad battery. The final piece of evidence that Koenig found to suggest to him that this was some sort of electric cell was the presence of a residue which suggested an electrolyte within the container.
Koenig never says that. He did not have proof of acid. So there's another very good article written by Emmerich Pastori in 1985. It was written in German, so a lot of people aren't reading it, but it analyzes all of the evidence. It does a great job. He did some scientific analysis of these objects after an exhibit in Germany that included the Baghdad battery and other versions of it. And when he analyzed it, he did find lead carbonates, which are deterioration products from the lead. He never talks about an acid corrosion, and no one really does. There's one mention that says after the war, meaning World War II, someone looked at this and found acid corrosion. And Milo often says, especially about conspiracy theorists, that they'll refer to an experiment and they won't tell you what was found or how it was done. You have to have the experiment and be able to understand that it was using good techniques or whatever. So there we go.
She summarizes Artifactually Speaking's video with the following. So, where Rossi claims there are no records of the gravesite, Dr. Hafford shows us there are. Where Rossi claims there is no evidence the iron rods were found in situ with the jars, Dr. Hafford shows us there were. Where Rossi claims that all the evidence has been obtained from a single artifact, Dr. Hafford shows us the evidence has been obtained from at least 11 artifacts. And where Rossi claims that Baghdad Battery is a conspiracy, Dr. Hafford demonstrates that some of the artifacts were scientifically analyzed and found to be hypothetically functional as batteries, and that there's another interpretation of them that's better attested by the archaeological record, which is that they had a ritual function. Rossi does not find enough evidence to suggest the artifacts could have been batteries because he did not look for or use the archaeological data and instead uses spurious secondary sources. Since Rossi failed to use the archaeological data, he misunderstood the artifacts. Since Rossi misunderstood the artifacts, he misrepresents the leading interpretation by archaeologists, which is, contrary to Rossi's claims, sufficiently evidenced. Rossi misinforms his viewers about the artifact and various interpretations of it. In other words, Rossi's data collection falls far short of what is needed on the subject, and he doesn't come close to performing the necessary work.
If a person engages in the creative part of archaeology, but does not conduct the meticulous work, that person is not doing archaeology.
Milo responded with the video, of course, and Holly points out some issues with it, starting with the factual error.
He says we don't know who found it. We do know who found it. In Al-Haik in Sumer 1964.
Well, I guess we do know who found it. Well, I didn't know who found it, but he knows who found it, and I am very impressed. I'm curious, the reference paper that you are discussing here, if this is from a personal collection or a local library, or if this was an online source. Because I am no longer enrolled at my university, I am having a really hard time accessing scientific papers and stuff like that. There is definitely some issue in getting my hands on primary documents when they are locked behind paywalls and I can't find another way to get them. So I'm curious where you found this source, because I mean, this is a wealth of information on the topic. I wish I had this for my video.
Because these are not primary sources, these are secondary sources. And then she gives us the next clip.
The one from Kuyut Rawa in 1936 was found on its own. There was only one.
That is something which was not only not talked about, but it was discussed incorrectly in almost every single one of the papers that I read. The one jar became 4 jars, and the location where it was found ended up being somewhere 15 miles away from Baghdad instead of only 4. So, interesting how information changes over time if there's no one there to fact check.
Holly points out there are some sources for this that are easily obtained, and that if you wanted to spend a few bucks, you could do so, and that Milo does make enough money that he could afford to invest a little bit into papers and articles and stuff on his website to make his YouTubes better, or whatever you want to say about it. And that really allows her to segue into another accusation that's generally made against pseudo-archaeologists, that they're grifters for the almighty dollar. She starts with definitions found on Wikipedia. Whether or not Rossi's videos are factually correct or ethically sound, he gains abundantly per video. As stated on the Wikipedia page on pseudo-archaeology, prominent academic archaeologist Colin Fenrue stated his opinion that it was appalling that pseudo-archaeologists treated archaeological evidence in such a frivolous and self-serving way, something he believed trivialized the serious matter of the study of human origins. The Wikipedia page on pseudo-archaeology also notes that academics like John R. Cole, Garrett F. Fagan, and Kenneth L. Feeder have argued that the pseudo-archaeological interpretation of the past were based on sensationalism, self-contradiction, fallacious logic, manufactured or misinterpreted evidence, quotes taken out of context, and incorrect information. As highlighted by Dr. Hafford and Justin Langlis in Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 herewith, incorrect information, sensationalism, and manufactured and misinterpreted evidence all feature in Rossi's videos on the Baghdad Battery and the Guadalupe ruins. Ordinarily, Wikipedia is an unreliable source of information due to the anonymity of its editors. On March 30th, 2023, however, in response to a comment on Twitter, archaeologist John Hoops from Kansas University claimed editorship of the specific Wikipedia page. And she shows us evidence this is the case, and obviously the reason behind this is to show that it's not just some rando on Wikipedia making these, it's John Hoops himself, the same John Hoops that was like, "Yay Milo, you are a warrior against pseudo-archaeology." She then continues with the following quote, "Academic critics have stated that pseudo-archaeologists typically neglect to use a scientific method. Instead of testing evidence to see what hypotheses it satisfies best, pseudo-archaeologists force the archaeological data to fit a favored conclusion that is often arrived at through hunches, intuition, or religious or nationalist dogma. Pseudo-archaeological groups have a variety of basic assumptions which are typically unscientific. Many of pseudo-archaeology's proponents claim they have gained their conclusions using scientific techniques and methods, even when it is demonstrable that they have not. Holly mentions that Hoops and Company make sure to say that the forcing of data into preconceived notions is one of the hallmarks of a pseudo-archaeologist, and then she gives us this.
Howdy friends, my name is Milo, and welcome to Awful Archaeology, the show where I spin this bingo wheel which I got from Target in order to randomly pick one of these archaeological conspiracy theories to talk about in depth. As you may remember, once upon a time I did have a roulette wheel that I would spin and then pick the archaeological conspiracies that way, but for those of you who don't know, I managed to lose the wheel. How you lose something that is digital?
I don't know, I'm making this up as I go.
So going forward, every single episode of this progressively more painful series is going to be picked by this ball of balls. Last episode, we talked about the Dendera Light, an Egyptian carving which conspiracy theorists will claim as proof that ancient Egyptians had working electric lights. At the time when we filmed that video, I was still between random picking methods, and so I decided to just pick the next conspiracy myself. And I decided it would make a lot of sense to stick with the theme of ancient electricity conspiracy theories, which is why, ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to present to you this episode of Awful Archaeology, where I will be telling you everything you need to know about the
This shows that Milo had branded these conspiracy theories before he evaluated them, and that is the kind of bias that I completely complain about all the time if you've watched me in the past, and if you haven't, well, you should watch me more and you'll hear me complain about this sort of thing. There's tons of videos on my channel. Like and subscribe. But honestly, this is way less about like Milo himself, in my opinion, than like archaeology and pseudo-archaeology in general. That aspect right there is something we see a lot of. Now, Holly quotes this clip from Milo's hangout with Dr. Yano.
So you have a series called Awful Archaeology, right?
I do, yes.
And what's the premise, basically?
So the premise of Awful Archaeology is, whereas a lot of my videos on TikTok revolve around a specific video that I find or am tagged in, and I just debunk that one video, Awful Archaeology is meant to show that there is a wide array of pseudoscience and pseudo-archaeology that kind of needs talking about. So typically I try and talk about a mix of things which are really well known and things which aren't really well known. So, there's, countless conspiracies about, building the pyramids and stuff like that. But people may not know about, the Clute Bowl or the Beartooth Highway Molar, or these things which are just a lot smaller, but are used in these more rhetorical circles in order to bolster their misinformation. So I think it's kind of important to have this diverse, cast of different topics to discuss in order to really show how deep-rooted it is and how dangerous it really can be.
Yeah, you've done one on the Bat Creek inscription, is that right?
I have done one on the Bat Creek inscription. It was the Grave Creek inscription.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Creek, yeah.
It's a different one, isn't it?
Yes, there are quite a few. The United States is full of them, especially, I mean, it's what happens when you have a country which, has not done a whole lot of archaeology on their own soil. It's really easy for, people to fabricate artifacts and to, draw conclusions, just because there is a lack of understanding in the topic. So,
which again shows like this predetermined outcome for the investigation of these claims. Now, Holly goes on a lot from here. She talks about Gunung Padang. She talks about the Younger Dryas impact. She talks about a few more smaller aspects of this whole thing. And I'm not really wanting to get into every aspect of it because this was the major thrust of it, was Milo is a pseudo-archaeologist because of his own standards, his own team's standards, and the words that come out of his mouth and the way that he goes about doing things. So that's the part that I wanted to address. Now, Holly summarizes her case thusly. Investigating the claim that Milo Rossi, aka Miniminuteman, is a conspiracy theorist. In calling himself a conspiracy debunker, Rossi intends to prove that archaeological conspiracies exist when they are often absent. This became particularly apparent in Dr. Hafford's response to Rossi's interpretation of the Baghdad Battery and Rossi's explanation of his awful archaeology method, in selecting a topic from a pre-prepared list of 75 alleged archaeological conspiracy theories before comprehensively researching the topics. Rossi has been found to force evidence to fit his preconceived opinions and disseminate inauthentic information. Evidently, the same can be said about his approach to Hancock's Netflix series. We've also found, thanks to Langlois' response to Rossi's evident lack of knowledge about archaeological ethics, that though Rossi refers to himself as an archaeologist, he isn't one. We've also deduced, thanks to Dr. Miano and Dr. Hoop's detailed descriptions of what constitutes pseudo-archaeology, that Rossi thoroughly fits the description of a pseudo-archaeologist. We've shown that Rossi's self-entitled role as archaeological conspiracy debunker who is defending the truth of science against a malignant other is wildly misguided. Archaeology is neither hard science to be believed in like microbiology, nor is it compatible with claims to the truth without posing a tangible danger. A wrongful conspiracy accusation is a witch hunt where the accused is a victim of harmful allegations and the truth defender a conspiracy theorist whose allegations are insufficiently grounded. Such was the major finding of Chapter 4 of 13 consecutive harmful allegations made by Rossi against Hancock. Not a single one has been found to be accurately reported, sufficiently evidenced, reasonable, or true. Such is the irony of a wrongful conspiracy allegation. In claiming a conspiracy is present where it's absent, Rossi, the self-entitled conspiracy debunker, has outed himself as a deceptive conspiracy theorist. Granted, our explanation of Rossi's claims about Hancock only covered 1 of 4 videos of his I Watched Ancient Apocalypse So You Don't Have To series. However, Rossi's choice of series title, which seeks to discourage his viewers from watching Hancock's while convincing them of his trustworthiness, his failure to report a single point made by Hancock in Episode 1 to his viewers accurately, his masquerade as an archaeologist when he isn't one, his evident lack of archaeological ethics and failure to seek out primary data when formulating his interpretations, the excuses he makes about paywalled research expenses when he earns abundantly per video, his insulting failure to report expert opinions on the topics, like that of Dr. Nadi Wajawa, and his team at Gunung Padang, and his jeering, sneering mockery and harmful, wrongful accusations directed at other people and their work, are enough to demonstrate that Milo Rossi, aka Miniminuteman, cannot be trusted. Well, that was one hell of a case, so what do I think about it? Well, let's go through it a little bit piece by piece. First, we'll start with the Guadalupe ruins. Well, one thing I will say in Milo's defense, not quite defense, but a little apologism for the lad, as a happy accident would be, or a sad accident in this case, but happy for him, I guess, the whole Pueblo region, the whole southwest of the United States, has been the subject of a thing called pot hunting for a very, very long time, over 100 years. And it's the kind of thing that families would do after church and shit, like in the 60s. You'd go out to an old ruin and you'd dig around in the dirt and you'd look for a pot. They didn't look for pottery shards. That's where there's so many of them still laying around. They looked for, like, the whole damn thing. So this is very, very, very common in the region, to the point where there is no context left to be had in a place like the Guadalupe ruins when it comes to a single potsherd. So Milo certainly didn't ruin anything there. Although, by showing people that this is something to do, he quite possibly did a lot of damage by proxy, if you get what I'm saying. He taught other people to do some shitty things there. But what Milo did there, to give you an example of how bad it is there, they recently had a bust. I think it was 2009. I'll put the link down below and some shit on the screen or something. I don't know. Something. I'll do something. But they had this big old bust, and it was like 40,000 artifacts in the region were looted. And these were like sheriffs and mayors and shit, like rich people, okay? Like this was a big to-do. And what's really funny is the local media coverage. It is not very politically correct, you would say. It's not very much about we're doing a good job for the archaeologists and for the indigenous Americans by preserving contact. No. It was more like, what in the hell are you doing to our locals here? You're ruining our community with this stupid shit that we've been doing for 100 years already. So, point there is that Milo, again, the most damage he did there was by proxy. He could have dug probably 10 feet down in the Guadalupe ruins without too much. Don't go digging in the Guadalupe ruins. Jeez, I'm not saying that. And when it comes to the Baghdad battery section, you know, Holly points out the money he makes now when talking about the money that Milo could spend on doing research, and that was from like a couple of years ago. So he's not making as much back then as he does now. Doesn't really change the point because the ball was rolling. Milo was making enough money to invest, but he wasn't making nearly as much as he was now. So when the figures that are listed there aren't completely accurate, in my opinion. But what the really big thing here is, Milo's own words were his biggest evidence against him, right? Milo's words and the words of guys like Hoops and Dr. Miano. This put Milo in a position, basically, where it's like, he's calling himself a pseudo-archaeologist or a fraud or whatever, right? And this is where me knowing him makes things a little bit different for me, because I don't see those quotes so cut and dry. I know him well enough to know there's absolutely no way he's going to maintain both of those things at the same time in his head. He's not going to be like, oh yeah, I'm a fraud if I call myself an archaeologist and I'm an archaeologist. Somewhere there's a disconnect there. And I haven't reached out and asked him the opinion on that. I'm just going to, when we have the hangout, I'll talk to him about it. I'm sure his answer will be pretty straightforward, pretty cut and dry. It might even just be that he didn't get to finish saying what he was saying in the hangout with Dr. Miano. I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like I'm getting a little bit of apology. Some of you guys are going to start calling me a Milo Rossi apologist now instead of a Graham Hancock apologist. What are you going to say about that? But seriously, I do think that if you talk to the lad a little bit, I do think that he will have an answer for this. It's not absolutely insane. Although I have to say I'm not seeing it on its face. But I do know Milo, and I don't think that this is, at the very least, he'd be like, well, shit, I probably shouldn't have said that when I was on Dr. Miano. You know, I had too many beers. That's a possibility as well. And I know a lot of you are going to think that's being too nice to Milo, because a lot of things that he said about Graham, those broad brush racism accusations in particular, are pretty savage. But I've talked to Milo, and he said, like, the first time he saw one of my videos that addressed that, he was like, you know, I really do need to be a lot more careful in how I direct that. And so I'm not sure where we're going to, how that's going to pan out. But again, me and him are going to have a chat, hopefully in like a month or so. And that will be something that's discussed as well. So anyway, I do have a little bit more faith in him. So I'm not, even guys like Dibble that I hammered at, I gave the guy like months before I was like, dude, stop. And started getting to be an ass about it to a degree, because he wouldn't stop. But I digress. Anyway, my point is, I do think that Milo is worth the effort. I do think that I don't think he's going to become some pyramidiot like the rest of us, but I do think that with a little bit of talk that will roll back the crazy with the accusations and stuff and recognize that this is more political and not evidence-driven at all, and really has no place in this discussion. And when you break out those kinds of things, you open yourself up to this kind of thing. You can't call somebody terrible shit like a racist and a misogynist and then not get this kind of crap in response. You imply that Hancock is part of the alt-right pipeline. You can't then complain when he turns around and says you're a pseudo-archaeologist yourself, especially when he uses your own words and the words of your buddies to do it. Now, we see this in the comments section of any popular video covering the Joe Rogan debate. Many are mocking Graham and Flint on personal items, and have nothing to do with the evidence, logic, or ideas, none of that. It's all about appearance, personality, that sort of thing. And this has gotten completely out of hand, and the accusations of racism seems to be where it first really got ugly, where it first changed from debating the evidence to debating the people. And that's a messed up place to be, in my opinion, because we all have shortcomings, and those are easy to isolate and attack, if you're being underhanded about it. And in this community, it's gotten pretty underhanded about now, thanks to academics shifting the discourse from the evidence to the person. Hell, I have more than one subscriber sending me information about some of the archaeologists that I've been covering that is scathing, just bad. It's personal information, though. It has nothing to do with the debate. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about. It only has to do with them as a human, just their personal life. So 2 reasons that I don't bring that stuff up in my videos. Well, 1, it has nothing to do with the subject at hand. And number 2, it opens me up to the same kind of thing. Then I got somebody digging around in my personal life, pointing out my shortcomings and the times that I fell on my face. Is that what I want? Well, no, that's not what I want, man. I'm trying to talk about pyramids, not people's personal shortcomings. And let's be really clear here. Like, say, for instance, that I was able to prove that every archaeologist was a horrible, horrible human being. They all were frequent flyers to Epstein Island. Does that make Graham Hancock's hypotheses right? Or say that all the archaeologists prove that every book that Hancock's ever written has all been part of a massive ploy to sell ayahuasca. He's got a stake in it. He's an ayahuasca dealer. He is the freaking Pablo Escobar of ayahuasca. And that's the whole point. If I prove that that's the case, does that mean that I've proven Hancock's Lost Civ is false? No. So why the fuck is the discourse in that corner because people started throwing shit at each other. And this is the end result. This is what happens. Guys like Milo end up getting their own words used against them and called a pseudo-archaeologist. And my dumb ass has to stand here and look at two friends throwing mud at each other and go, God damn it, you guys. Why can't we all just get along? As an aside, tell me that Graham Hancock writing all these books and making all these videos to sell ayahuasca isn't the best conspiracy theory you've ever heard. My point is the article's good, but the fact that the article is good is bad. It shows how bad the environment is right now, how bad the discourse is right now. The thing is, Milo has accused Hancock of being part of the alt-right pipeline, of spreading racism, of spreading misogyny. And he might not have accused Hancock point blank, but he definitely puts Hancock in that camp. The last episode of his "You don't need to watch Ancient Apocalypse because I did" type of thing, that last episode spends a bunch of time talking about just the politics aspect of it and blames a lot of really bad crap on Hancock et al., not just Hancock. And that's, well, again, this is why you get this. You can't call somebody a racist and a misogynist and not have them fire back if they're not a racist and a misogynist. If they actually are, they might be like, hey, sweet. But, you know, Hancock has been, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that people have called him names for the exact opposite reason, for marrying a woman who wasn't white back in the day when that was really a big deal. So I'm guessing, just going on a limb, I've talked to Graham some, but I haven't sat there and, well, Graham, how do you feel about this? We want to sit on the chair and tell me about your father. None of that shit's ever happened. But I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that this really fucking pisses him off, and that he really, really, really doesn't like it, and that he has no problem throwing the gloves on the ground and putting on a pair of brass knuckles when y'all fucking go down that road. So maybe, for the 10,000th time, stick to the fucking evidence and quit talking about the social issues, since you're archaeologists and not psychologists. Just a thought. Now, thankfully, I think Milo will learn from this. He is one of the good ones. So there's a pretty good chance that he's going to walk away from this as a better person. And that's one of the reasons that I get along so well with him, despite him saying things that I bristle at, because he does change his position on them. He doesn't say, like some of the other archaeologists that I've dealt with, I won't change my opinion on this no matter what you say. He is evidence-based, which means I can work with the man. So, I hope you found this informative. I hope you didn't find it too fence city, but you know, whatever. I'm going to fence it on this one. I like Graham. I like Milo. I don't like that papers like this get written, but I've seen Milo say shit like this to Graham, so what am I going to say, man? You know, this is... Be nice, guys. Play better. Talk about pyramids and less about people. But, you know, in the meantime, I'll talk about the people involved and the pyramids. Hi, I'm Dan. Have a nice day.